A city took away a landlord's rental license because of crime committed near his property. But was it the right thing to do? I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. Alright, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over those public nuisance laws. Okay, so basically, a lot of cities, they have in place these laws that say, hey, if we have a lot of, calls for service to these properties, if we have a lot of criminal activity that's going on around these properties, well, we can, basically make it so a landlord has to evict their tenants or will take away their rental license. Now, I do believe that this is something that is good for neighborhoods, okay? I believe that, hey, if we got bad tenants up in a property, we need to get rid of them. Now, most landlords are doing that work on their own, okay? They're doing good tenant screening. They are making sure that they don't put garbage tenants in their properties because it is not profitable, okay? It is not good business to put somebody in your property who is running around, shooting up the place, committing crimes, etc. But what I have found is that a lot of the times what you'll do is you'll rent to somebody who is, clean record, no problems, decent job, etc. But they've got, a bad relative or a bad friend or somebody who, might not even be on the lease, who hangs out at the house and causes all sorts of problems. So how do you as a landlord get around that, and how do you not get screwed over because of that? So that's what it sounds like is happening in this story, in this article I'm going to be reading for you today. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. What do you think of these public nuisance laws, okay, that, either punish the landlord or force the landlord to evict tenants, who are causing this sort of crime, okay? What do you think of that? I have mixed opinions. Obviously, I am not a fan of crime at all. And it's my belief that, hey, anything we can do to get these criminals out of an area and make the area better is a good thing. But I don't like to see landlords being punished for things that are beyond their control. Anyway, let's get into this article. It's coming from thegazette.com, and it says, Cedar Rapids landlord's rental permit suspended on nuisance house following gun arrest. And the story is deeper than it sounds. It's not as simple as, it may sound from the beginning. So once you get further along in the article, more details start coming out, and then you start to realize, oh, yeah, maybe something more is going on here. So let's get into it. The city of Cedar Rapids is suspending a landlord's rental permit on a house declared a nuisance after numerous reports of gunshots being fired there, and in May, a felon was arrested with a gun after leaving that address. An administrative hearing officer upheld the city's nuisance designation of the rental house at 1748 C Avenue Northeast. The city's Building Services Department is in the process of notifying Property Holders Ltd. that its rental unit registration suspension for that property will become effective August 15th for a period of 1 year. City officials said in a statement, a suspension means that tenants at the house would have to move and property holders would not be able to rent it out again during that period. So yeah, this sort of legislation or rule or regulation or whatever it is, right, basically says, hey, we're going to take away your rental license. You won't be able to rent this property out for a year, and the people who live in it have to move. And, that's a big thing, especially if you're a small landlord with just one property. You've basically made my property useless, or you've turned me into a criminal for operating my business, okay? So, yeah, this is, I can't say it's a bad thing. I can't really, because there are some landlords, and I'm going to say, less than 1% of landlords who aren't doing, their due diligence with their property and making sure their tenants aren't causing this sort of problem. And I thought that was the case in this story, but as we go along in it, you're going to see that there's a little bit more to the story. Landlord Charles Davison, operating as property holders, can appeal the city's housing board of the city's housing board of appeals. He also can appeal the hearing officer's decision to a 6th Judicial District Associate Judge. Peter Riley, property holder's lawyer, said Thursday the firm is planning to appeal the suspension. In 2020, Davison did appeal a suspension at another of his properties, 2307 Bever Avenue Southeast, and 3 others deemed nuisances, but lost that appeal, and the rental unit registrations on those 4 rentals were suspended for 6 months. So now it's coming out that, hey, this landlord has had other nuisance properties other than this just one. Okay, so you start to begin to wonder, hey, what kind of tenant screening is this landlord doing? What kind of tenants is this landlord putting in there? Now I realize that, hey, a lot of landlords are dealing in what I would call war zones, okay? And these are very low income areas with very high crime, and you're not going to be able to get the best tenant selection in these areas. So there are landlords who deal in these areas who have to, deal with messes like this, right? But at the same time, if you've already had some properties where, your license has been suspended, well, this might not be the best place to invest if I was you, or you might be the issue, okay? In May, the Gazette reported the 1748 C Avenue Northeast property has had numerous reports by neighbors of gunshots being fired, which has resulted in bullets coming through their homes. Davison's property on Bever Avenue had similar problems, and that tenant, who works for Davison, had to move and relocate it to the C Avenue address. Now, there is the key right there, okay? So what it says right there is that back in 2020, a couple of years ago, this other house that this landlord owns, became a nuisance property, okay? And basically had its rental license suspended. So what does this landlord do? Rather than getting rid of this tenant, the landlord moves this tenant to another one of his properties. And now all the gunshots, all the violence, all the nuisance problems from this other property that had already been suspended, guess what? They moved with this bad tenant to the new address. Okay? And then it comes out, guess what? This tenant that was moved actually works for the landlord. Okay, this is one of the landlord's employees. So these two, they personally know each other. This isn't a regular landlord-tenant relationship. Okay, the landlord and the tenant know each other, and the landlord is trying to help this tenant out, who obviously has somebody in his household who is causing all of this criminal activity, right? So as we go along, you're going to find out exactly who that is. According to evidence at a July 11th administrative hearing on the nuisance issue, police had increased patrols in the neighborhood to reduce the gunfire incidents. The house was under surveillance by a team focusing on gun violence when Royal Jones, 19, was arrested on May 19th. Jones, who was on probation for a robbery conviction and not allowed to have a firearm as a felon, was one of the several individuals who exited the house that day. James Pearsall, a lawyer who works under contract as a hearing officer for the city, said in his report. Officers who responded to the call for service knew some of these individuals had existing arrest warrants. Jones was arrested nearby after he ran from police at 1748 C Avenue Northeast, Pearsall noted. So yeah, they got this guy, wanted for felony charges, coming out of this guy's house, running from police. They've got constant gunshots going on, and this is a 19-year-old kid, okay? And you're like, well, what does this 19-year-old kid have to do with the tenant? Okay, well, guess what? The 19-year-old kid is one of the friends of the son of the tenant. During the hearing, Michael White, who is a maintenance employee for property holders and a tenant at the C Avenue house, testified his son in the past had individuals there when he and his wife were not home, Pearsall stated in his report. White gave officers permission to search the home. A gun was found that belonged to his son's friends. White also during the hearing disputed that Jones and others arrested in May were at his house, Pearsall said in the report. However, neither White nor his wife were home and had no direct knowledge as to who was at the house, Pearsall added. Pearsall said that based on a preponderance of the evidence, White's son has had individuals visiting him when his parents weren't home, and the officer saw Jones and the others at the house when they arrived. As a result, the city has met its burden to declare the house a nuisance, he concluded. So there we go. We got a tenant living in the house, right? Tenant has a job, works for the landlord. But guess what? That tenant's son is a dirtbag, okay? Hangs out with criminals. Probably is a criminal himself if he's holding the gun for one of his friends. Okay, probably the tenant's son is a criminal himself, probably committing all sorts of crimes, etc. If this other kid was 19, I'm betting this is an over 18, son, right? Well, you know what? I can't forgive the landlord for this one, okay? Normally, I would be like, hey, the landlord needs to be given the benefit of the doubt. The landlord, has property rights. It isn't always the landlord's fault when this sort of stuff is going on. But because the fact that, hey, we had another nuisance house owned by the same landlord with the same tenant in it, and now this tenant is moved over to this house, and there's gunshots, there's crime, there's all sorts of criminals running around. Well, guess what? That is the landlord's fault. That is not a problem of tenant screening. That is a crappy landlord, okay? And like I said, this isn't the majority of us. The majority of us are doing everything that we should be doing, right? And while I don't support the sort of laws that punish landlords for the actions of people who aren't even tenants, or for their tenants are doing, I can say that, hey, in this case, this landlord is, really, just screwing up an entire area, just basically shifting the crime problem from one area to another to try to help out their employee. And I think that's a horrible thing to do, okay? So yeah, if it comes down to this sort of law and it's not a landlord intentionally, trying to circumvent the law and, screwing things up, well, guess what? I'm against it. Okay, so I don't like this sort of law because, like I said, we got a criminal coming out of the house. We got people who aren't even tenants who are committing crimes in the area, and if it was up to me, you know what? The landlord should be able to do an emergency eviction on that tenant and get them out of there as soon as possible. This landlord wasn't going to do that because their employee or their buddy or whatever was up there living in there, and they'll probably just move them to another house and then create another crime problem at the next place as well.